Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Kev and today I want to respond to a comment that I got on a previous video. I'll link that video somewhere here. But basically Crust Icon 23, I think it's Crust Icon, it might be Crusticon, reached out and said this. My arthritis is so advanced, this looks like the stuff of dreams. I have a whole host of conditions as well as psoriatic arthritis, and I'm beginning initially just with a small series of stretching exercise as directed by my rheumatologist and physios. I'd love to see you do a few vids based on way back from the ability levels this workout requires. Think wheelchair user, crutch hobbler, that sort of thing. You can read the rest of the comment there yourself, but I saw this comment, I thought it was very fair. So today I want to talk about how to move. I've got a couple of things I'd like to talk about first, and then I've got some movement that I will kind of talk through, and I've got a video where I can actually demo some of this sort of stuff. But basically, arthritis is challenging, as I'm sure any chronic pain condition or chronic inflammatory condition is, because only you know what you are experiencing. It's very difficult for me to say, you should do this or try doing this, because I don't know what this or that feels like to you, right? And neither, to be honest, does your rheumatologist, and neither does your physio. And I am absolutely not saying to disregard what they're telling you. They are there to provide guidance and provide and share information to you. But they don't know what it feels like. Only you know what it feels like. So what you need to do is arm yourself with information and then figure out what you can do and then push yourself as hard as you feel comfortable in that general direction. So what I would say to begin with is, if you can walk, then walk. I think that's probably the most important thing. I've talked about this in plenty of other videos. I believe walking is a form of medicine. It is something that we have evolved to do, essentially. There's a book I'm reading at the moment called Exercised by Daniel Lieberman, who is the professor of biological sciences in the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. And he talks a lot about walking and how hunter-gatherers and stuff like that walk. But he also has this passage, which I thought was very interesting and very important, especially if you have arthritis. He says, among other effects, while physical activity initially stimulates inflammation, especially via muscles, it subsequently causes muscles to produce an even stronger, more lasting, and more widespread anti-inflammatory response, whose long-term effect is less inflammation, not just in the affected muscle, but elsewhere. As a result, physically active people tend to have lower baseline levels of inflammation. So I think that just kind of underscores why it's so important to move and why I'm always saying just walk as much as possible. If you go over to my Instagram page, you'll see I'm out walking every day. I think I'm on day 166 or something like that. And this is just a staple part of my routine. If walking is a problem for you, walking in a swimming pool might be an option, or even just swimming. But the buoyancy of the water can help take pressure off the joints. So if you can just walk lengths of the pool, even that can be hugely beneficial. If you can't walk at all, then cycling is a good option if you can cycle. If you are confined to a wheelchair, like the comment here suggests, I think just even getting out in the wheelchair and moving your arms as much as possible, I think would still be a good option. Again, I can't really speak from any real experience there. It might be, what I just said might be very ignorant and even offensive, so I apologize if it was. But the point is, getting out and moving through space, I think is hugely important. Now, above and beyond that, when it comes to movement, the way I like to think about things is to focus on the 4 fundamental human movements. So this is something I got from strength coach Dan John, who's fairly renowned strength coach. He's been strength training for a long time. And he basically divides human movements up into 4 categories, which are push, pull, hinge, and squat. And what I would recommend doing is try to find some movement that you can do, whatever it is that you can do, a movement in each one of those categories, and focus on that movement and try and build strength in that area. So for me personally, when I first started, I focused heavily on body weight, and I was doing a lot of body weight exercises and just gradually building strength, and then transitioned to kettlebells and transitioned to barbells and kind of gradually got stronger and improved my mobility as I went along. But those fundamental movements, if you can find what is the most basic thing that you can do in each of those movements, and then just focus on doing that thing. And when that thing becomes easy, if it becomes easy at some point in the future, you can look to progress it. And I'm going to show now some of the movements in each of those categories and how maybe you can progress some of those movements. Okay, so I've put together a little video here. This is just me recording in my living room. I basically just turned on the camera and started recording. And the reason I did that, I mean, I could have gone to, my local gym. There's always space for me to record there, and I can use fancy equipment and have nice lighting and all that. But I really wanted to show that this is stuff that you can just do at home in your living room. I didn't put on training gear. This is just what I happen to be wearing today. Just turned on the camera and started doing some of these movements. So the first movement we're going to look at is squatting. Now, squatting should probably be pretty familiar for most people. There's Mona, she decided to get in my way. So this is a squat, where the squat position is where you've got maximal bend in your knee and maximal bend at your hips. And the goal is to try and keep your back straight and keep your chest up. Now, this level of depth is probably not achievable for the majority of people, certainly not straight away. It took me a long time to get to this point, and I'll show you some progressions of how you can kind of scale back and then, work up to this point. But this is kind of what a squat looks like. I can sit pretty comfortably in that squat position for a long time, but that is your basic squat. Okay, so once I come out of this, the next thing you can think about is, here's front on. Again, the important thing is keep the chest up and keep your back straight and keep yourself upright. Mona keeps meowing at me, so I have to give her some attention. So the next thing you can do is this kind of squat down to parallel here. So this is where I'm just not squatting as deep. And maybe if mobility or pain is an issue, if you have some knee trouble, maybe you can go this deep. Okay, so that's you. If this is as deep as you can go in your squat, just go this deep and work on that, and gradually work on your mobility, which again we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But you can always scale it back and just reduce the range of motion, which will make the movement easier. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to pick up this footstool thing that I have. And what we're going to do is basically sit down onto it. You can use a chair, you could use the couch that's there in the corner of the screen. But basically you're just sitting down. And if you have a cat, you can pet your cat while you're down there. So you're just sitting down and standing up. Now the important thing here is that when you're standing up, you're trying not to lean really far forward. You're trying to put the power is really coming from the top of your legs here, the muscle on the front, which is called the quadriceps. So as you're doing this, especially when you're doing a kind of a more simplified, in quotes, version of these movements, I think it's really important to focus on the muscle engagement, right? Think about the muscle that you're actually trying to engage. You should feel the top of your legs, and you can actually touch it with your hands. You should feel that getting harder as you try to stand up, right? As that contraction is happening. So here, as you sit down, you want to try and stand up just straight, right? And put all of the pressure into the quads, right? You shouldn't really be feeling this in your knees or anything like that. And you're trying not to lean forward, okay? So the next thing I want to show here is like a problem a lot of people have with their squats is actually an ankle mobility. So something you can do is you can get into this position, and if you're just trying to lean forward on your knee and you're trying to push your knee in front of your foot, right? And you might feel that's tight on the back of your leg, around your ankle, around the Achilles tendon there. So you can kind of spend a bit of time just working on increasing the flexibility, and that will make it easier to move into the squat position. Same goes for this down dog kind of position here. I'm just kind of working the heels out, stretching my calf, trying to improve the mobility there at the back of my leg. And because when people squat, oftentimes tightness there and lack of mobility there, that's what's stopping them from getting into a deep position. Okay, so this is what it often looks like when people squat, is they're coming down and they're leaning forward, and it's because their knees can't get far enough forward, so you can't really sit back and down into the squat. And with a squat, you're trying to sit back and down. Okay, so if your squat kind of looks like this, there's a good chance actually you just don't have the ankle mobility. Now, if squatting is completely off the table for you, what you can do is you can actually sit down, and this footstool is probably a bit low for this, but basically you can try and raise your foot like that. So try and keep your knee in the same position, and you're just raising your foot. And again, you really want to focus on the fact that if you just try and lift your leg now, you want that muscle on the top of your leg should be feeling hard. That should be contracting, and really, really focus on that and try and squeeze that muscle as hard as you can, right? This is the muscle. If you have knee problems, this muscle, strengthening this muscle will kind of help support the joint. So if you can't squat at all, I think that's a really, really good option. There are some other options as well, like lunges, but I think that's a very good kind of basic option. And then finally, you can hold on to something and squat down and go again as deep as you can, or as, If you can't go that deep, it's fine. Just go as deep as you can. So that's it for squat. There's a couple of regressions there, but I think the best option, again, if you have some issues with mobility, standing up from a chair, working on those straight leg raises where you're just sitting down and lifting, bending at the knee and lifting your foot. I think they are really, really good options just to start building that connection between your mind and the muscles in your legs, the quads. So next we're going to look at hinging. So a hinge basically looks like this. Okay, so before with squat, I said you've got kind of maximal bend in your knee and maximal bend in your hips. When it comes to a hinge, you've actually got minimal bend in your knee, but maximal bend at your hips. So you look like a hinge. And the goal here is to kind of try and keep your back straight. And what this is doing is it's kind of putting pressure on my hamstrings, and really it's my glutes and your ass muscles that are firing up to help push you forward. Now, a very basic version of a hinge looks something like this. This is just called a bridge. You'll often see this in yoga and Pilates and stuff like that, but you can see we're actually just hinging at the hips there. And I think this for me is a movement everybody should be doing, which is you get a band, which you can get off your physio, put it around your knees and press your knees out against the band and then come up and really squeeze your glutes into this one. And what this is going to do is help build strength in your glutes, which is going to help your lower back and your hamstrings as well. And this is kind of really the powerhouse of your body. So it's really important to keep these muscles strong. Like the glutes are huge muscles. When animals jump, four-legged animals, a lot of it's coming from their glutes. Now, with the bridge, I think doing that movement and doing what I'm doing here are two great things to do when it comes to the hinge. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting all of my weight on the front foot here. Okay, the back foot, it's down, but it's very, very light. I'm not really putting any weight. It's purely there for balance. And what I'm imagining is that there's a puddle just in front of my foot. And I'm leaning over, I'm trying to keep my back straight, and I'm trying to look at myself, at my reflection in the puddle. Okay, so I'm kind of leaning forward and over. I've got a bend in my knee, and I want to keep that bend in my knee through the whole movement. And you can see I've actually got my hand kind of on my glute here. And I'm twisting my body slightly over that leg to put all my weight in that leg. And when you do this, you'll really feel that glute kind of turn on. It should feel hard as you're doing this movement. And this is a kind of a very pure form of the hinge. So I think that plus the bridge are two great ways to start thinking about hinging and start building some strength in that back chain, right? Which is your back chain is the muscles coming up the back of your legs, through your glutes and into your back. So this is just a great movement for everyone to do. This is a ballistic hinge movement with a kettlebell. Now, this might look scary, especially if you're sore and you've got sore joints. But actually, this one is great. If your hips aren't too bad, you're not actually putting too much stress in your knees. You're moving your shoulders, but you're not putting too much pressure on them. Your elbows, your arms, they're just kind of loose. So really, this is just a ballistic movement that's all coming through your hips. It's the glutes that are firing and pushing the kettlebell through. So I think this is a really, really great movement for rehab. Again, if your hips aren't too bad, maybe if you have trouble with your knees, that can be a really, really useful. I almost treat kettlebell swings as a kind of a rehab exercise. I think they're just a great, and to be honest, as you'll see from the remainder of this video, kettlebells for me are just a great tool to have. They take up very little space in your house, but you can do a lot with them. You could pick up that kettlebell and do squats as well if you want to add weight to the squats, if you're getting comfortable with squats. The other thing you can do here is a deadlift, where basically I'm just picking the kettlebell up, keeping my back straight, engaging the glutes and pushing my hips forward and through to meet the bell. My hips and my knees kind of straighten out at the same time. And again, this is just a pretty straightforward hinge movement. Okay, that's it with the hinge. Now we're on to push, and I think push will be familiar to most people. Here is just a basic push-up. With the push-up, the key thing is you want to keep your elbows in tight and not flare them outwards. Keep them in really, really tight to your bodies and keep your shoulders back and down as much as possible. So you really want to just tighten everything up. If you're loose and your elbows are out, what you're going to do is put a lot of pressure on your shoulder, a lot of pressure on your elbows. And we really don't want that. I mean, if you've got arthritis and various other conditions, you do not want to be putting unnecessary pressure on your joints. So that's really important. Now with the push-up, you can regress this pretty easily. Some people say push up from your knees, but I don't like that. I much prefer to raise the hands. So you can put your hands up on something like this or something higher. You could use a kitchen table. I could use the arm of the couch there. And if you want to make it more difficult, you put your feet up. So you're changing the angle so there's more pressure coming on your arms. So these are ways that you can just take this movement and you can make it a bit easier and a bit harder. The easiest variant would be just against a wall. And again, as I mentioned already, with the very easy variants of these things, you want, again, I'm putting easy in quotes, right? Easy is relative, and I don't really like saying something's easy because we're all at very different levels. But when you're at this, when you're standing up straight, you're actually putting very little pressure on your arms. So when you're pushing against the wall, really try and feel the back of your arm and really try and feel your chest. You want to just try and feel the muscles, feel what's actually turning on when you're doing these movements. And by increasing that, what we call body awareness, you get much more in tune with your body. So when something's sore, you know whether moving it will help or whether you need to rest it, okay? And then you can kind of figure out what can you do. You'll learn certain movements that you know, oh, when I'm feeling this kind of pain, this sort of movement helps me. Like I know, for example, if my hip is feeling sore, I actually think squats are great for me. I go for a walk and I do some squats and that would really help. But I've cultivated this body awareness over years, right? So I think that's really important. Really just think about the muscles that you're actually engaging at. With any of these variants, but if the variant feels particularly light, I think it's more important to focus on the actual muscle being engaged. Here we have another press or push, but this push, instead of pushing our arms out in front, we're pushing overhead. This is one of my favorite movements. I'm using like an 8-kilo kettlebell here. You can grab a can of beans or a bottle of water or something like that, just any small amount of weight that you can handle, and just press it over your head like that. Again, this is just another example of a push, one of my favorite movements. I do a lot of pressing like this, and I think they're just great for the shoulder. And the final one we're going to look at is pulling. So pulling is kind of the opposite of the push, right? Here, I'm just kind of leaning over, bracing my body, and I'm pulling the kettlebell in. Now, with a pull, usually you'll see pull-ups and chin-ups. They're kind of the gold standard for pulling. I just didn't have a pull-up bar in my living room. I've got one in this room here, up there. But it's a bit of a small room to record in. But I think this is kind of an easier thing to start out with. And here I just kind of changed the angle a bit, and I'm actually allowing myself to just put the kettlebell down and take the weight off in between movements. And again, you can use any sort of weight here. You could use a bottle of water, whatever it is. The important thing is you're feeling your back muscle pull the weight up towards your chest. Okay. Now, I'm not talking too much about proper form and stuff. There's plenty of people on YouTube that are probably better at explaining this stuff to me than me. Like for squatting, for example, go look up Squat University. I think that's a great channel. Here, I'm basically taking a physio band and just rowing. So I'm just pulling it again, trying to squeeze my shoulders together and pull the band back towards my body. But what I'm saying, there's loads of videos on YouTube. You can kind of look up some of these movements and you can find regressions. You can find people that do really in-depth walkthroughs of, what good form looks like and stuff like that. But if I was to do that in this video, we'd be here all day. The final thing is, I think this is a really good general mobility test. So basically what I'm going to do is just get down on the floor and get up off the floor. And this is something that will kind of show you how good your mobility is, okay? Then I'm going to take one hand and put it behind my back. So now I've only got one hand and my two legs to get up and down from the floor. So this is a bit more of a challenge on the mobility, but I think this is just a good test. You can do this today, see how easy or difficult it is. Now I'll put two hands behind my back and see what happens. This is a bit less graceful, but this is a good kind of test to do to see where you're at today. And then you can start working on your mobility and your movement and your strength and see what does this look like in 3 to 6 months or whatever. And this is just a generally useful mobility test. And that's it. So hopefully, Crust Icon 23, hopefully that was helpful to you and maybe to some other people that stumble across this video. The important takeaway is, I think, to remember that only you know how you're feeling. You can take knowledge and advice from other people, but it's up to you to kind of apply it and learn your body and figure out what you can do. And whatever it is you can do, really start pushing hard on those things. Walk if possible. I think that's super important. And then the 4 fundamental human movements are push, pull, hinge, and squat. That's all I've got for today. Hopefully this was useful. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.